What if everything you thought you knew about burials was only a fraction of the story? Picture this: a world where the dead aren't laid to rest in quiet graves, but are instead perched upright, seated as if in conversation, surrounded by their most cherished possessions and even their beloved pets. This isn't the stuff of fiction. It's just one of the countless astonishing ways ancient civilizations honored their departed. Death, it seems, has never been a one-size-fits-all affair. Across continents and centuries, cultures have crafted rituals so unique, so deeply symbolic, that they challenge our modern perceptions of mourning and the afterlife. Today, we're embarking on a journey through time to uncover 20 of the most shocking burial practices ever recorded, traditions that range from the poetic to the downright surreal. Consider for a moment the sheer diversity of human belief. In some cultures, the dead were sent skyward, their bodies left exposed to the elements as a final act of spiritual release. In others, people spent years preparing for their own deaths, following strict rituals to achieve self-mummification. These practices weren't merely about disposing of the physical body. They were profound expressions of faith, love, and sometimes even fear. They reveal how deeply our ancestors grappled with the mysteries of existence, crafting rituals that bridged the gap between the living and the unknown. So why do these ancient customs still captivate us today? Perhaps it's because they force us to confront the universal questions that have haunted humanity since the beginning. What happens after we die? How do we honor those who have passed, and what legacies do we leave behind? As we peel back the layers of these 20 extraordinary burial rites, you'll discover not just the strangeness of the past, but also the threads of connection that bind us to those who came before. From towering burial mounds to secret catacombs, each tradition holds a story, one that's waiting to be told, ready to step into the shadows of history. Let's begin. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where the earth meets the sky, Tibetan Buddhists practiced one of the most striking burial rituals the world has ever known, the sky burial. Imagine a final farewell where the body isn't buried or burned but carried to a sacred mountaintop, left exposed to the wind and the wings of vultures. This wasn't an act of neglect but one of profound reverence. In Tibetan belief, the body is merely an empty vessel after death, and to let it nourish the birds creatures revered as sky chariots was the ultimate act of compassion. It completed a sacred cycle, returning the physical form to the natural world while freeing the soul for its journey to the next life. The process itself was deeply ceremonial. Special practitioners, known as Rojyapas, prepared the body with precise rituals, often dismembering it to make it easier for the vultures to consume. To outsiders, this might seem shocking, but for Tibetan families, it was a moment of spiritual generosity. They believed that by offering their loved one's body to the birds, they were performing a final act of charity, ensuring the deceased accumulated merit for their next rebirth. The faster the vultures consumed the body, the smoother the soul's transition was thought to be. What makes sky burials so extraordinary isn't just their visual intensity, but the philosophy behind them. In a landscape where the ground is often frozen and wood for cremation is scarce, this practice was also deeply practical. But more than that, it reflected a worldview where death wasn't an end but a transformation, a return to the elements. The vultures, far from being feared, were seen as sacred intermediaries, carrying the essence of the departed toward liberation. Even today, despite modern influences, sky burials remain a vital tradition in many Tibetan communities. They stand as a powerful reminder of how differently cultures honor the departed, not with fear or avoidance, but with a serene acceptance of nature's role in the cycle of life. And perhaps that's the most striking lesson of all, that in the high, quiet places of the world, death isn't hidden away but embraced as part of something far greater. Deep in the misty mountains of northern Japan, a group of monks pursued a path so extreme it defies modern understanding, voluntarily transforming their own bodies into sacred relics through self-mummification. This wasn't a sudden act but a years-long ritual of purification, a physical and spiritual marathon where the ultimate prize was to transcend death itself. Known as Sokushin Batsu, or Buddha in the flesh, this practice was the pinnacle of devotion, a test of willpower so intense that only a handful of monks across centuries ever achieved it. The process began with a radical 1,000-day diet of pine needles, resin, and toxic nuts from the oroshi tree, a substance normally used to lacquer bowls but which, when ingested, slowly poisoned the body. This macabre nutrition served a dual purpose. It eliminated fat and moisture to halt decomposition while also embalming the monk from within. Next came another 1,000 days of starvation, with only minimal water and bark to sustain them. Finally, when the monk felt death approaching, he would enter a tiny underground chamber barely larger than his body, assume the lotus position, and be sealed inside with nothing but a bamboo air tube and a bell to signal he was still alive. When the bell stopped ringing, the tube was removed and the tomb was sealed for 3 more years. Only then would it be opened to see if the mummification had succeeded. What makes these monks so extraordinary isn't just their physical endurance but their unshakable belief. They weren't seeking fame or even remembrance. They aimed to become vessels of compassion, eternal guides for the living. Those who achieved Sokushin Batsu were enshrined as living Buddhas, their preserved bodies dressed in robes and worshipped as bridges between the mortal and divine. To their followers, these monks hadn't truly died. They existed in a state of deep meditation, radiating spiritual power for centuries. Yet behind the reverence lies a haunting question. What kind of devotion drives someone to willingly endure such torment? The answer lies in the Buddhist concept of shugyo, austere training to break the illusions of the physical world. For these monks, the agony was meaningless compared to the eternal peace they sought. Even the Japanese government, which banned the practice in the 19th century, couldn't erase the awe surrounding these human relics. Today, 24 Sokushin Batsu remain enshrined across Japan, their glass-eyed gazes still challenging visitors to ponder the price of enlightenment. Perhaps the most striking of all is Shinryokai Shonin, a monk who left behind a poem as he entered his tomb. "Do not grieve for my body, for it is but a shell. My true self walks with you always." In those words, we glimpse the heart of this practice, not a morbid obsession with death, but a luminous belief in something far beyond it. The Vikings didn't just bury their dead, they launched them into eternity like kings. Picture a massive wooden ship, its hull glistening with shields and packed with swords, drinking horns and chests of silver, all set ablaze as it drifts into the fjord at dusk. This wasn't spectacle for spectacle's sake. It was a sacred bridge between worlds. For Viking chieftains and warriors, a ship burial was the ultimate honor, a fiery ticket to Valhalla, where Odin himself would welcome them to an endless feast among heroes. But the grandeur of these funerals went beyond myth. Archaeologists digging in Scandinavia have uncovered ships buried intact, their timbers preserved by clay or peat, offering an eerie snapshot of Viking beliefs. One of the most famous, the Oseberg ship in Norway, held the remains of 2 women, likely a queen and her servant, surrounded by carved sledges, tapestries, and even sacrificed horses. The message was clear: status didn't end at death. The afterlife demanded the same riches and respect as the mortal world. What's most startling, though, isn't just the opulence, it's the violence woven into the ritual. Historical accounts describe thralls or enslaved people voluntarily joining their masters in death, a grim testament to loyalty or coercion. The 10th century Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan witnessed a Viking funeral on the Volga River, where a young enslaved woman was ritually sacrificed to accompany her lord. His chilling account details how she was given intoxicating drinks, ceremonially lifted onto the ship, and then strangled before the flames took her. To modern eyes, it's horrifying, but to the Vikings, it was a necessary escort, a servant for the journey beyond. Yet beneath the brutality lay a deeper philosophy. Ships weren't just vessels for travel, they were symbols of transition, carrying souls from the realm of men to the realm of gods. The flames purified, the offerings secured favor, and the sea, ever restless, mirrored the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Even the placement of the body mattered. Some were laid to rest on beds of feathers, as if to soften the voyage, while others were propped upright, armed and ready for whatever awaited them. Today, these buried ships are time capsules of a culture that saw death not as an end, but as the next great adventure. The Gokstad ship in Oslo, with its dragon-headed prow still snarling after 1,000 years, reminds us that for the Vikings, honor wasn't just how you lived, it was how you were sent off. And perhaps that's why these burials still captivate us. They're not just about death, but about defiance, a roaring refusal to go quietly into the night. Thousands of years before the pharaohs turned mummification into an art form for the elite, a small coastal people in what is now Chile were perfecting the practice for everyone. The Chinchorro, a fishing culture thriving along the arid coasts of northern Chile, didn't reserve eternal preservation for kings or nobles. They believed every life, from the eldest hunter to the tiniest infant, deserved to be remembered. Their mummies, some dating back to 5,000 years before the Common Era, aren't just the oldest in the world, they're a radical statement about equality in death. The process was astonishingly intricate. Unlike the Egyptians, who focused on internal organ removal, the Chinchorro meticulously stripped the skin from the body, treated it with natural preservatives, and then reinforced the skeleton with sticks and reeds before reassembling the skin like a sculptor's clay. Some mummies were even given new faces molded from black manganese paste or red ochre, their features eerily lifelike beneath wigs of human hair. The result wasn't just preservation, it was transformation. A child who died in infancy might be given the serene expression of an elder, as if death had granted them wisdom beyond their years. What's most striking, though, isn't just the technique, it's the philosophy behind it. In a world where most ancient cultures reserved elaborate burials for the powerful, the Chinchorro's egalitarian approach suggests a profound reverence for all human life. Archaeologists have found mummies of all ages and social statuses treated with equal care, their graves filled with simple offerings like fishing nets or shellfish necklaces. This wasn't a society obsessed with hierarchy, it was one that saw death as the ultimate unifier. But why go to such lengths? The harsh desert environment, where water was scarce and decay slow, might have made mummification practical. Yet the artistry involved the painstaking repainting of faces every few generations. The way some mummies were carried from place to place hints at something deeper. These weren't just bodies, they were family, kept present among the living long after their last breath. Some scholars believe the Chinchorro saw their mummies as intermediaries, watching over the community like silent guardians. Today, these ancient figures rest in museums, their painted gazes still holding secrets we've only begun to unravel. In their stillness, they challenge our modern assumptions about who deserves remembrance. While the pharaohs built pyramids to tower above the common people, the Chinchorro crafted a quieter revolution, one that whispered, in skin and reed and pigment, that every life leaves a mark worth preserving. In the heart of ancient Persia, where fire temples flickered with eternal flames, the Zoroastrians built their dead not down into the earth, but up toward the heavens on towering stone platforms known as dakmas, or towers of silence. These eerie, open-air structures weren't monuments to death but altars to purity, designed with meticulous precision to honor the elements their faith held sacred. Imagine a circular stone terrace high on a barren hill where bodies were arranged beneath the open sky, left not to rot but to return to nature in the most elemental way possible. Vultures, swift and efficient, would descend to strip the flesh from bone, completing a cycle that avoided contaminating the earth or fire, both considered divine. This practice wasn't born from indifference but from deep spiritual logic. Zoroastrians saw death as the ultimate impurity, a force that could corrupt the sacred if mishandled. Burial would defile the soil, cremation would taint the fire. Even the rain that washed over the dakmas was believed to carry corruption into rivers, so the towers were often built in arid landscapes, their slopes carefully angled to channel fluids into central pits lined with charcoal and sand. Every detail served a higher purpose, to protect creation while freeing the soul. What's remarkable is how long this tradition endured. For over 3,000 years, through empires and invasions, Zoroastrians maintained this ritual, adapting only when forced. In modern Mumbai, where high rises now crowd the skyline, the dwindling Parsi community still uses towers of silence, though urban sprawl has thinned the vulture populations, forcing painful compromises like solar reflectors to hasten decomposition. Yet even these changes are met with fierce debate, a testament to how deeply the practice is woven into identity. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of the dakmas isn't their strangeness to outsiders, but their intimacy for those who practiced it. Zoroastrian texts describe the soul lingering for 3 days after death, hovering near the body as it undergoes purification. Families would keep vigil, praying not for the dead, but for the living, asking that the departed's good deeds might inspire those left behind. The towers, then, weren't just disposal sites but thresholds where the physical and spiritual worlds briefly touched. Today, as the sun sets over the crumbling dakmas of Yazd in Iran, their silent stones whisper a challenge to our modern ways of mourning. In an age where death is often sanitized, hidden behind hospital curtains and polished caskets, the towers of silence remind us that endings can be both raw and reverent, a surrender not to darkness, but to the relentless, sacred logic of the natural world. Among the rolling green hills of New Zealand, the Maori people developed a burial practice as intense as their volcanic landscape, the umu tai, an earth oven that transformed death into a sacred act of preservation. Picture a pit dug deep into the earth, lined with scorching stones, where the body of a revered chief or leader would be carefully wrapped in leaves and steamed for days, not to be consumed but to be honored. This wasn't mere cooking, it was a ritual of transformation, a way to slow decay so the community could gather for days of mourning, storytelling, and farewells befitting a life of significance. The umu tai was reserved for those of the highest rank, a testament to the Maori belief that leaders deserved a passage as extraordinary as their deeds. The process began with the heating of stones in a roaring fire until they glowed red-hot. Once the pit was prepared, the body, wrapped in protective layers of flax or other sacred plants, was placed inside, covered with more leaves and earth to trap the heat. The steam that rose wasn't just physical, it carried the essence of the departed, mingling with the chants and prayers of the living. For 3 days or more, the body would remain in this natural sanctum, emerging not as a decaying shell but as a preserved vessel, ready for the final rituals. What makes this practice so profound isn't just the method, but the meaning behind it. The Maori saw death as a transition, not an end, and the umu tai ensured the physical form remained intact long enough for the spiritual journey to begin. The slow steaming mirrored the patience required to honor a great life properly. It allowed time for distant relatives to travel, for songs to be composed, and for the stories of the deceased to be retold in full. The body, once removed, might be placed in a secluded cave or burial site, but its preservation meant the community could grieve without rushing, a luxury rarely afforded in other cultures. Yet the umu tai wasn't just about the dead, it was a gift to the living. By extending the farewell, the Maori created space for collective healing. The shared labor of digging the pit, gathering stones, and tending the fire bound the community together in purpose. Even the act of unwrapping the body was ceremonial, a moment where the veil between worlds grew thin, and the presence of the departed could almost be felt. Today, while modern customs have largely replaced the umu tai, its legacy lingers in the way Maori communities honor their dead, with time, reverence, and a deep understanding that mourning is as much for those left behind as for those who have passed. In an era where funerals can feel hurried or impersonal, the umu tai stands as a reminder. Some farewells deserve to simmer, to steep in memory, until every last ounce of love and respect has been poured into the earth. In the dimly lit crypts of Europe's grandest churches, a spectacle of bones and gold once captivated the faithful skeletons draped in gemstones, their hollow eyes gazing out from beneath crowns of rubies and sapphires. These were the Catacomb saints, a collection of anonymous remains plucked from Rome's labyrinthine catacombs and transformed into celestial royalty during the Counter-Reformation. At a time when the Catholic Church was battling the rise of Protestantism, these macabre masterpieces became weapons of devotion, their glittering presence meant to awe the doubting and reignite the fervor of the faithful. The process was as meticulous as it was surreal. When early Christian burial sites were rediscovered beneath Rome in the 16th century, the church saw opportunity in the bones. Each skeleton was carefully authenticated not by name, for most were long forgotten, but by the presence of a martyr's palm leaf or a vial of dried blood, symbols of their sacrifice. Then came the artisans who swathed the bones in silk, threaded pearls between their ribs, and encrusted their skulls with precious stones. Some were posed with weapons of their supposed martyrdom, a tiny arrow lodged in a ribcage, a sword resting in fleshless fingers. The result was neither corpse nor relic, but something in between, a saint conjured from the shadows of history, dressed for eternity. What's most striking isn't just the opulence, but the sheer scale of the deception. Many of these saints were pure inventions, their backstories crafted to fit local needs. A skeleton might become Saint Aurelia for one town, only to be rebranded as Saint Clementia elsewhere. In Einsiedeln, Switzerland, a catacomb saint was even given a wax face, her features molded into an expression of serene piety, as if death had merely paused her prayers. The Church, in its desperation to counter Protestant austerity, had turned the dead into propaganda, a divine theater where every jewel whispered, "This is what true faith looks like." Yet beneath the glitter lay a deeper irony. These saints, meant to embody the purity of early Christianity, were often paraded through streets in lavish processions that would have horrified the humble martyrs they supposedly represented. The very excesses Protestants condemned, the veneration of remains, the blurring of piety and pageantry, were amplified in these displays, and the people loved it. Pilgrims flocked to touch the bejeweled bones, believing them capable of miracles. A saint's finger might cure illness, a glance from their gilded sockets could ward off evil. Today, the catacomb saints linger in glass cases, their jewels dulled by time, their stories fraying at the edges. Some were destroyed during the Enlightenment, deemed grotesque by reformers. Others were quietly tucked away, too unsettling for modern sensibilities. But in their heyday, they served as a mirror to an era when faith was both a battle and a performance, when even the dead could be drafted into service. They remind us that history's most powerful symbols are often the ones we dress up, quite literally, to tell the stories we need to hear. Perched precariously on sheer cliff faces, swaying gently above rushing rivers, the hanging coffins of China defy both gravity and time. These wooden caskets, some dating back over 3,000 years, cling to limestone crevices in the remote mountains of Sichuan and Fujian, silent sentinels of a tradition that balanced spiritual yearning with breathtaking engineering. Imagine the scene, mourners scaling dizzying heights, hoisting their loved ones' coffins into the sky, not as an act of abandonment, but as the ultimate act of reverence. For the Bo and Gayu people who practiced this ritual, elevation wasn't just practical, it was sacred. The higher the coffin, the closer the soul floated to the heavens, freed from the disturbances of the earthly realm below. The craftsmanship of these coffins alone is staggering, carved from single hollowed-out logs, often nautilus-shaped to symbolize eternity. They were designed to endure centuries of wind and rain. But the real mystery lies in how they got there. Without modern tools, how did ancient communities lift coffins weighing hundreds of pounds onto cliffs, sometimes 300 feet high? Theories abound. Some suggest intricate pulley systems woven from bamboo, while others point to narrow pathways carved into the rock, long since eroded away. A few coffins rest on wooden stakes driven into the stone like skeletal shelves defying logic. The most haunting are those wedged into natural caves, their occupants facing the sunrise each morning as if awaiting rebirth. Yet the symbolism runs deeper than mere height. In Chinese cosmology, mountains were bridges between realms, and caves represented the womb of the earth. Suspending coffins between them may have been a way to keep the dead in limbo, neither fully buried nor fully released, their spirits lingering to watch over the living. Some local legends even claim the coffins were placed high to prevent demons from stealing the bodies, a belief echoed in the way many were sealed with intricate carvings of animals and celestial beings standing guard. What's most poignant, though, is how these cliffs became communal storybooks. In the Wui Mountains, over 400 coffins nestle together across generations, some so old their wood has fused with the rock. They whisper of a culture that saw death not as an erasure, but as elevation, both literal and metaphorical. Today, as modern hikers crane their necks at these aerial tombs, they're left with a humbling truth. For the Bo and Gayu, death wasn't an end hidden underground, but a continuation suspended between earth and sky, forever part of the landscape they loved. In the quiet, waterlogged expanses of northern Europe's peat bogs, time stands still in the most unsettling way. Here, the earth doesn't just bury the dead, it swallows them whole, preserving their final moments with eerie precision. These are the bog bodies, hundreds of individuals from the Iron Age, their skin tanned dark by acidic peat, their faces so intact that even after 2,000 years, you can still see the stubble on a man's chin or the delicate braids in a woman's hair. But what makes these remains truly haunting isn't just their preservation, it's the stories they tell. Many bear unmistakable signs of brutality. Broken bones, slit throats, even nooses still coiled around their necks. These weren't quiet deaths, they were deliberate, often theatrical, and they've left scholars grappling with a single, chilling question. Were these people victims of ritual sacrifice, or were they paying the ultimate price for crimes long forgotten? Take Tolund man, discovered in Denmark with a rope still knotted around his throat. His face is so peaceful he might be sleeping, yet the violence of his end is undeniable. Or Lindo man found in an English bog with his skull fractured, his throat cut, and his body folded into the peat as if tucked into a grave. The details of their deaths suggest something more than mere punishment. The careful positioning of their bodies, the presence of last meals, some laced with hallucinogenic plants, hint at ceremonies meant to appease gods or mark transitions between seasons. The bogs themselves were likely seen as gateways to the otherworld, places where the line between the living and the divine blurred. To offer a life there wasn't just an execution, it was a sacred transaction. Yet not all bog bodies fit the sacrificial narrative. Some show signs of multiple injuries, suggesting they were outcasts or criminals executed for transgressions. The Id girl, a teenager with a crooked spine and a head half-severed, may have been killed for failing to meet societal expectations. The Romans wrote of Germanic tribes drowning those accused of cowardice or theft in bogs, their bodies pinned down with wooden stakes, a fate both punishment and deterrent. The peat, then, wasn't just a preservative, it was a passive participant in these acts, a natural archive of justice and fear. What's most striking, though, is how these bodies force us to confront the duality of ancient belief. The same communities that could brutally end a life also treated these corpses with strange tenderness. Many were laid carefully into the bog, some with offerings of butter or cloth, as if their deaths carried both shame and sanctity. The bogs, with their power to mummify, may have been chosen precisely because they suspended the dead in a state between decay and eternity, neither fully gone nor fully present, forever trapped in the threshold. Today, as we peer into the glass museum cases holding these figures, their leathery skin and sunken eyes seem to whisper secrets we'll never fully understand. They challenge our assumptions about justice, spirituality, and the value of a single life in a world where survival was precarious. The bog bodies don't just show us how these people died, they force us to reckon with why, and in doing so, they remind us that the past is never as simple as it seems. In the mist-shrouded highlands of Papua New Guinea, the four people practiced a burial ritual so intimate it blurred the line between mourner and mourned. When a loved one died, they weren't buried or burned, they were eaten. This was endo-cannibalism, not an act of savagery, but one of profound connection. The four believed that consuming the flesh of the deceased, particularly the brain, allowed their wisdom and strength to live on in the community. It was the ultimate act of remembrance, a way to knit the departed back into the fabric of the living through shared substance. The ritual unfolded with solemn care. Women and children, considered the guardians of tradition, prepared the body, removing the brain and cooking it with tender ferns in bamboo tubes. The process was deeply gendered. Men typically consumed muscle tissue, while women and children ate the organs, including the brain. This division, rooted in cultural beliefs about kinship and continuity, would tragically become the practice's undoing. Unbeknownst to the four, their sacred rite carried a hidden horror. In the mid-20th century, a mysterious illness began ravaging their villages. Victims first stumbled like drunks, then succumbed to uncontrollable tremors and laughter before dying in a state of terrifying lucidity. The disease, dubbed Chinchorro, meaning to shake in the four language, was eventually traced to misfolded proteins called prions, lurking in the brain tissue they consumed. These microscopic invaders turned the brain into a spongy wreck with no cure or escape. What makes this story so haunting isn't just the medical tragedy, but the cultural reckoning that followed. As entire villages emptied, anthropologists and doctors raced to unravel the connection between the disease and the four's rituals. The tribe, once isolated, found themselves at the center of a global scientific storm. Yet even as evidence mounted, abandoning the practice wasn't just a medical decision, it was a spiritual rupture. How do you sever a tradition that binds the living to the dead? By the 1960s, pressured by colonial authorities and facing decimation, the four reluctantly ended the practice, but their legacy endures in science. The study of Chinchorro revolutionized our understanding of prion diseases, from mad cow to Creutzfeldt-Jakob. The four's tragedy became a cornerstone of neurology, their sorrow gifting the world life-saving knowledge. Today, the abandoned ritual lingers as a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of cultural practices, yet it's also a testament to the four's resilience. Their willingness to adapt, even at the cost of a sacred tradition, speaks to something deeper than survival. It reveals the human capacity to honor the past while stepping into an uncertain future. In their story, we're reminded that even the most well-intentioned rituals can carry hidden costs, and that sometimes letting go is the hardest act of love. In the quiet outskirts of Phnom Penh, where tropical greenery now softens the scars of history, glass-paneled towers rise like silent sentinels, each one filled with skulls carefully arranged by age and gender, their hollow eyes staring out at visitors in unspoken testimony. These are the bone houses of Cambodia's killing fields, memorial stupas built not to hide the horror of the Khmer Rouge regime, but to confront it head-on. Unlike traditional burials that lay the dead to rest, these structures keep them vividly present, transforming anonymous victims into a collective cry against forgetting. The practice began in the late 1970s as survivors emerged from the nightmare of Pol Pot's genocide. Nearly 2 million people, teachers, farmers, even children had been executed for the crime of being intellectuals or simply existing at the wrong time. With mass graves dotting the countryside, there were too many bodies to bury individually. So communities did something radical. They gathered the bones, cleaned them by hand, and enshrined them in open-air stupas. At Choang Ek, the most infamous of the killing fields, over 5,000 skulls fill a towering glass reliquary, their fractures and bullet holes left visible as evidence. This wasn't just mourning, it was a refusal to let the world look away. What makes these memorials so powerful is their unflinching honesty. In Western cultures, we often shield ourselves from death's physicality. Caskets are closed, ashes scattered. But the bone houses force a different reckoning. Visitors walk past shelves of femurs and ribs, some still bearing traces of the ropes used to bind them. The stupas don't offer the comfort of closure, they demand witness. For Cambodians, this is intentional. As one survivor explained, "If we hide the bones, we hide the truth." Yet within the horror lies a profound tenderness. Families who lost loved ones to the killing fields often have no graves to visit, just these communal towers. On remembrance days, they leave offerings of flowers and incense, not for individual names, but for the collective loss. The stupas become living monuments where grief is both personal and national. Even the arrangement of skulls carries meaning. Grouped by gender and age, they restore a flicker of identity to those stripped of everything in death. Today, as tourists walk the paths of Choang Ek, listening to audio guides that recount the atrocities, the bone houses serve a dual purpose. They honor the dead, yes, but they also challenge the living. In a country where many Khmer Rouge leaders never faced justice, the skulls are more than relics, they're accusers. And in a world where genocide still occurs, they ask a question that echoes far beyond Cambodia's borders. How do we remember in a way that not only mourns but warns? The answer, perhaps, lies in the quiet determination of those who built these memorials. They chose not to bury the past, but to hold it up to the light bone by bone so that no one could ever claim they didn't know. In doing so, they turned agony into a form of resistance, proving that memory, when given physical form, can be the most powerful weapon of all. High in the rugged mountains of northern Luzon, where jagged cliffs plunge into misty valleys, the Igorot people of the Philippines crafted a burial tradition as striking as their homeland. Picture hand-carved wooden coffins shaped like canoes or hollowed-out logs, wedged into limestone caves or perched on narrow ledges hundreds of feet above the ground. Some have clung there for centuries, weathered by wind and rain, yet still holding the remains of generations. This wasn't just a practical solution to rocky terrain. It was a spiritual ladder, lifting the dead closer to their ancestors in the sky. The process itself was a community effort, blending physical labor with deep reverence. When an elder or respected member of the tribe passed, their body was carefully seated in a fetal position, wrapped in hand-woven blankets, and secured inside a coffin hewn from a single tree. The placement was everything. Families would scale precarious cliffs, often using ropes and makeshift scaffolds, to position the coffin just right. Some were stacked like sacred firewood in caves, while others dangled from outcrops, suspended between earth and heaven. The higher the coffin, the clearer the path for the soul's journey. What makes these burials so captivating isn't just their audacity, but the symbolism woven into every detail. The boat-shaped coffins, for instance, weren't random. They reflected the Igorot belief that death was a voyage, a crossing to the afterlife. The caves, too, held significance. Unlike the darkness we might associate with such spaces, the Igorot saw them as portals, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. Even the position of the bodies mattered. Curled like infants, the dead were symbolically returned to the womb of the earth, ready to be reborn. Yet these cliffs are more than just burial sites, they're living archives. Many coffins bear intricate carvings, from geometric patterns to animal motifs, each telling a story about the person inside. Some tribes even practiced a form of interactive mourning, returning to caves to feed their ancestors with rice, wine, or betel nut, maintaining a bond that death couldn't sever. The practice waned under colonial pressure, but in remote villages, whispers of the tradition endure. Today, as hikers stumble upon these silent sentinels, they're left with a humbling realization. The Igorot didn't just bury their dead, they launched them into eternity, one cliff at a time. In a world where we often hide death away, these swaying coffins challenge us to ask, what if we elevated our farewells, literally and figuratively, making them as monumental as the lives they honor? In the flickering glow of a funeral pyre, surrounded by chanting mourners and the acrid scent of burning sandalwood, a widow would take her final steps, not in grief but in grim resolve. This was Sati, an ancient Hindu practice where a woman, often by choice but sometimes by force, would ascend her husband's funeral pyre and perish alongside him. To outsiders, it seemed an unthinkable act of self-destruction, but in the rigid hierarchies of medieval India, it was celebrated as the pinnacle of wifely virtue, a sacrifice so pure it guaranteed the couple's eternal union in the afterlife. The word Sati itself means virtuous woman, and those who performed it were enshrined as goddesses, their deaths commemorated with temples and stone markers called Sati stones, carved with pairs of clasped hands to symbolize their unbreakable bond. Yet behind the idealized imagery lay a far darker reality. While some widows may have embraced Sati as an escape from the crushing stigma of widowhood, a status that often meant social exile, shaved heads, and a life of austerity, others were coerced or even drugged before being pushed onto the flames. Accounts from colonial officials describe women screaming as relatives used bamboo poles to prevent their escape, their cries drowned out by drums and hymns. The practice wasn't universal. It flourished among certain castes and regions, particularly in Rajasthan, where royal widows were expected to set an example of loyalty. One of the most infamous cases involved Rani Sati Dadi, whose 16th century sacrifice in Junjhunu is still venerated today, her temple drawing thousands despite modern laws against glorification. What makes Sati so unsettling isn't just its brutality, but the way it weaponized spirituality. Hindu texts like the Vedas mention it sparingly, yet by the Middle Ages it had been reframed as a sacred duty. Legends spoke of Sati's power to cleanse familial sins, even to stop rivers from flooding or cure droughts. This spiritual leverage made descent nearly impossible, who would deny a woman her chance at divine glory. Even reformers faced backlash. When Roger Ram Mohan Roy campaigned against Sati in the early 19th century, citing its absence in core scriptures, traditionalists accused him of undermining Hindu culture. It took British colonial intervention to ban the practice in 1829. Though sporadic cases persisted for decades, the legacy of Sati lingers in modern India as a fraught cultural touchstone. Feminist scholars point to it as the ultimate expression of patriarchal control, a ritual that romanticized female self-erasure. Yet some communities still quietly revere historical Sati martyrs, their stones adorned with vermilion and flowers. The tension between memory and morality came to a head in 1987, when 18-year-old Roop Kanwar's alleged Sati in Deorala sparked national outrage. Was she a willing martyr, as her supporters claimed, or a victim of family pressure? The debate exposed how deeply these ancient expectations could still simmer beneath the surface of a modern society. Perhaps the most haunting question Sati leaves us with isn't about the past, but about the present. How do we reconcile reverence for tradition with the recognition of its harms? The practice may be outlawed, but its shadow remains a reminder of how easily devotion can be twisted into demand, and how the loudest voices in history aren't always those of the silenced. In the charred echoes of those pyres, we hear not just the crackle of flames, but the muffled cries of choices never truly given. Beneath the sun-baked earth of ancient byblos, nestled along the Mediterranean coast, lie the smallest graves ever discovered, tiny bodies curled inside towering clay jars, their delicate bones surrounded by necklaces of shell and beads. These jar burials, dating back over 5,000 years, speak to a grief as timeless as it is universal, the loss of a child. What's striking isn't just the act of placing infants in vessels meant for grain or wine, but the care evident in every detail. Some jars were lined with fabric, others filled with toys or amulets, as if parents couldn't bear to send their little ones into the unknown empty-handed. The jars themselves tell a silent story. Many were repurposed storage containers, their everyday use transformed into something sacred. A pot that once held olives might cradle a child's remains, its mouth sealed with a stone or smaller vessel, creating a symbolic womb for the afterlife. Archaeologists have noted how often these jars were placed beneath homes or in communal burial grounds, suggesting a duality of mourning, private enough for intimacy, yet public enough to affirm the child's place in the community's memory. But why jars? In a region where wood was scarce and stone coffins impractical for such small bodies, ceramics offered a practical solution, yet the choice likely held deeper meaning. The Phoenicians of Byblos saw the sea as both life-giver and gateway to the divine. A jar, shaped like the waves that brought trade and sustenance, may have been seen as a vessel for the soul's journey, its rounded walls echoing the cyclical nature of life and death. Some jars even bear traces of ochre or resin, perhaps intended to purify or protect the child in the next world. The grave goods add another layer of tenderness. A shell bracelet too tiny for an adult wrist, a pottery rattle, or a figurine of a protective deity. These weren't mere ritual offerings but personal farewells. One jar held a necklace of carnelian beads, each one painstakingly drilled by hand, a labor of love that outlasted the giver. Such finds challenge the old assumption that ancient societies didn't mourn children as deeply as we do today. The sheer variety of objects, from the humble to the exquisite, suggests these losses were felt acutely, their memorialization as nuanced as the lives they commemorated. Today, these jars sit in museum cases, their contents long since studied, yet they still resonate with a quiet power. They remind us that grief transcends time, that 5 millennia ago, parents too wept over tiny graves, leaving behind not just bones, but proof of a love that refused to be forgotten. In their silence, these jars ask us to listen, not to the grand narratives of kings and conquests, but to the whispers of ordinary hearts breaking, then mending, then breaking again across the centuries. On the arid coast of ancient Peru, where the desert meets the endless blue of the Pacific, the Paracas people crafted burials that were less like interments and more like sacred works of art, mummy bundles so intricate, so layered with meaning, that they've left archaeologists in awe for centuries. Picture a body carefully seated in the fetal position, swaddled in not one or two, but dozens of vibrantly dyed textiles, each fold and not a deliberate step in a spiritual choreography. These weren't mere shrouds, they were cosmic maps, guiding the deceased through the afterlife with colors so bright they still dazzle after 2,000 years. The process began with the body itself, dried and preserved by the desert's natural embrace. Then came the wrapping layer upon layer of embroidered cloth, some woven with such precision that modern experts struggle to replicate their complexity. The outermost textiles often featured breathtaking depictions of gods, mythical creatures, or geometric patterns believed to hold protective power. The bundles could grow so massive, some weighing over 100 pounds, that they required special frames to support them during ceremonies. This wasn't just burial, it was a slow, deliberate transformation, turning the physical form into something both sacred and eternal. What makes these bundles so extraordinary isn't just their artistry, but the philosophy behind them. For the Paracas, death wasn't an end, but a transition through multiple realms. Each layer of cloth symbolized a stage in this journey, a barrier to cross or a challenge to overcome. The innermost wrappings might represent the earthly realm, while the outer ones shimmered with celestial imagery, as if the deceased were being handed from one world to the next. Some bundles even contained miniature offerings, gold ornaments, shells, or tools tucked between folds like secret gifts for the gods. The colors alone tell a story of devotion. Using dyes derived from plants, minerals, and even rare sea snails, the Paracas achieved hues so vivid they seemed to pulse with life. A single bundle might blend crimson, emerald, and cobalt, each shade chosen not just for beauty but for symbolic resonance. Red could symbolize blood and vitality, while gold threads mirrored the sun's divine light. These weren't random choices, they were a language woven into fabric to speak to the unseen. Yet the most haunting revelation came when modern technology peered beneath the layers. CT scans of unopened bundles revealed surprises. Some contained not just one body, but multiple individuals, often arranged as if in embrace. Were these family members reunited in death, sacrificial companions? The answer remains elusive, but the intimacy is undeniable. Even the positioning mattered. Many bundles were buried seated upright, facing the ocean or sacred mountains, their posture echoing the Paracas' belief in rebirth, a return to the fetal state, ready to begin anew. Today, these bundles rest in museums, their colors faded but still luminous, their secrets slowly unraveling. They challenge our modern notion of burials as somber, minimalist affairs. For the Paracas, death was an occasion for splendor, a final masterpiece to honor a life lived. In their threads, we see not just technical skill, but a profound declaration. that the journey beyond deserves as much care, as much beauty, as the life that came before. In the highlands of Madagascar, where the air hums with the scent of vanilla and cloves, death isn't a farewell, it's a reunion. Here, the Malagasy people practice Famadihana, a ritual so vibrant it turns mourning into celebration. Picture this: every 5 to 7 years, families gather at their ancestral tombs, not to weep but to dance. As musicians play spirited tunes, the graves are opened, and the ancestors' remains, carefully wrapped in fresh silk shrouds, are lifted into the sunlight. What follows isn't solemn silence, but laughter, feasting, and the joyful sway of bodies moving in rhythm with the dead. To outsiders, it might seem surreal, but for the Malagasy, this is the purest expression of love, a reminder that those who have passed are never truly gone. The ceremony begins with meticulous care. The bones, often fragile with age, are handled with reverence, wrapped in bright lambas, traditional textiles dyed in bold reds and yellows before being paraded around the tomb. The atmosphere is anything but grim. Children giggle as they touch the bundles, elders share stories of the departed, and everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, takes a turn holding their ancestors aloft. This isn't morbidity, it's intimacy. The Malagasy believe the dead remain part of the family, and Famadihana is their way of keeping the connection alive. We dance with them because they dance with us in our dreams, one participant explained. The ritual even has a practical side. Rewrapping the bones prevents moisture damage, ensuring the ancestors rest comfortably until the next reunion. But Famadihana isn't just about preservation, it's about communication. During the festivities, families update their ancestors on births, marriages, and harvests, seeking blessings or advice. In a culture where the dead are considered intermediaries between the living and the divine, these conversations are as natural as chatting with a grandparent. Some even believe the ancestors' spirits grow restless if neglected, bringing misfortune until they're acknowledged. One village elder described how a sudden drought ended only after a long-delayed Famadihana was finally held. Coincidence, perhaps, but for the Malagasy, the message was clear: the dead demand their due. What makes this practice so extraordinary is how it flips Western notions of grief on their head. Where many cultures seal death away behind cemetery gates, the Malagasy invite it to the table. There's no black attire, no hushed tones, just color, music, and an unshakable belief that love doesn't end with a last breath. Even the tombs themselves reflect this philosophy. In the rocky hills of Ambohijafai, some resemble miniature palaces, painted in cheerful hues and adorned with carved wooden figures. These aren't places of sorrow, they're monuments to continuity, where the line between past and present blurs into irrelevance. Yet Famadihana isn't without its controversies. Christian missionaries and colonial authorities once condemned it as pagan, and some younger Malagasy, lured by urban life, now skip the ritual. Climate change, too, poses a threat. Rising temperatures make the once predictable dry seasons erratic, complicating exhumations. But in villages where the tradition thrives, the response is unwavering. "How could we abandon them?" asked one woman, cradling her great-grandfather's bones. "They waited for us, we must return the favor." In the end, Famadihana offers a radical lesson: that grief and joy aren't opposites but companions. As the sun sets over the highlands, the bundles are returned to their tombs, but the party often continues late into the night. The ancestors, it's said, wouldn't have it any other way. After all, why should death be lonely when it can be a dance? On the windswept island of Sardinia, where the Mediterranean sun bakes the earth to a golden crisp, the Nuragic people left behind monuments so imposing they were later called giants' tombs by awestruck locals. These sprawling stone structures, some stretching nearly 100 feet long, weren't built for solitary kings or warriors. They were communal houses of eternity, where generations of the dead rested shoulder to shoulder in a silent, stone-ribbed embrace. Picture a crescent of massive slabs, their edges precisely fitted without mortar, crowned with a central stele taller than a man, carved with symbolic portals believed to guide souls to the afterlife. These weren't mere graves, they were architectural hymns to the power of collective memory. What makes these tombs extraordinary isn't just their scale, but the way they mirror the neuralgic worldview. Unlike cultures that entombed elites in isolated splendor, the neuralgic arranged their dead in careful circles within the tombs, their bones often mingled over centuries as new burials were added. This wasn't haphazard, it reflected a belief that death dissolved individual status, weaving everyone into a shared spiritual tapestry. Archaeologists have found men, women, and children buried alike, their remains accompanied by simple offerings, pottery, bronze figurines, or seashells from the distant coast. The message was clear: in death, as in life, community came first. The engineering alone defies expectation. Using nothing but stone tools and brute strength, the neuralgic quarried, hauled, and positioned basalt blocks weighing tons, some dragged miles from distant mountains. The tomb's facades curve like open arms, their central monoliths often carved with spirals or bull horns, symbols of regeneration and strength. Inside, narrow corridors lined with smaller stones lead to burial chambers where the air stays cool and dry, a natural preservative that kept bones intact for millennia. Even the placement mattered. Many tombs faced the rising sun, their entrances aligned with solstice events, turning them into celestial calendars as much as memorials. But perhaps the most haunting discovery is how these spaces evolved. Some tombs show evidence of periodic reopening, not just for new burials, but for rituals where the living interacted with the dead. Bones were sometimes rearranged, skulls grouped together, or artifacts swapped out, suggesting an ongoing relationship between generations. The neuralgic didn't just bury their dead and walk away, they returned, communed, and perhaps even sought counsel from those who'd gone before. In a sense, the tombs were less like crypts and more like meeting halls, where the boundary between past and present blurred. Today, as visitors duck through the low doorways of giants' tombs like Mont Esabe or Kodu Vecchiu, they're met with an eerie sense of continuity. The silence inside isn't empty, it's thick with whispers across time. These stones don't just memorialize the dead, they testify to a civilization that measured its greatness not in gold or conquests, but in its capacity to hold space, literally and spiritually, for every member. In a world obsessed with individual legacy, the neuralgic offer a quiet counterpoint. That true immortality might lie not in standing apart, but in resting together. Walk through any village in Thailand, and you'll spot them perched on wooden stilts or nestled beneath towering trees, miniature palaces no larger than a dollhouse, their peaked roofs gleaming with gold leaf, their tiny verandas crowded with fresh fruit, flickering candles, and even brightly colored toy cars. These are spirit houses or san fra phum, and they're far more than decorative curiosities. To the Thai people, they're sacred way stations for the dead, places where restless souls can find comfort and company, ensuring they don't linger among the living as ghosts. Imagine a world where the departed aren't banished to distant graveyards but given pride of place in the family compound. Their presence acknowledged daily with offerings of steamed rice, sweet coconut cakes, or even a child's favorite action figure. This is a tradition where death doesn't sever bonds, it simply renegotiates them. The ritual begins with careful construction. Spirit houses aren't thrown together, they're crafted by skilled artisans to mirror traditional Thai architecture, complete with intricate carvings and tiny staircases. Their placement is equally deliberate. A Brahmin priest might be consulted to determine the most auspicious spot, often facing away from the main house to prevent spiritual congestion. Once installed, the spirit house becomes a hub of activity. Mornings might begin with a bowl of fresh water or a stick of incense, while special occasions call for elaborate feasts laid out on miniature porcelain plates. Even passing strangers might pause to leave a flower or coin, a small act of respect for the unseen residents. What makes this practice so fascinating is how it weaves together threads of animism and Buddhism. On one hand, the spirit houses stem from ancient beliefs that every place, forests, rivers, even homes has its own guardian spirit or fae. Neglect these entities and misfortune could follow. Yet Buddhism, with its emphasis on karma and impermanence, tempers this fear with compassion. Offerings aren't just bribes to ward off bad luck. They are acts of merit, a way to cultivate kindness toward all beings, visible or otherwise. The result is a uniquely Thai synthesis where the pragmatic meets the profound. But spirit houses aren't just about appeasement, they are also about inclusion. In a culture where ancestors are considered part of the family, these tiny shrines keep them close. A grandmother who loved orchids might find her spirit house adorned with fresh blooms. A child who passed too soon might receive a new toy every week. The offerings aren't generic, they're deeply personal, reflecting the quirks and passions of those who have moved on. Some families even hold conversations with their spirit houses, sharing news or seeking guidance, blurring the line between prayer and conversation. Yet the tradition isn't without its complexities. Modernization has introduced spirit houses shaped like skyscrapers or even 7-Elevens, a whimsical nod to contemporary life. But critics argue this commercialization risks diluting the practice's spiritual weight. Meanwhile, in bustling Bangkok, high-rise apartments might feature a single, crowded spirit house in the lobby, a far cry from the intimate village rituals. Still, the core belief persists that the dead deserve a seat at the table, even if that table is the size of a shoebox. Perhaps the most touching detail lies in the way these tiny structures evolve. A spirit house isn't built once and forgotten. It's repainted, repaired, and sometimes even upgraded as the family's fortunes improve. The message is clear: those who are gone may not walk beside us, but they'll never be left behind. In a world that often hides death away, Thailand's spirit houses stand as a vibrant reminder. Memory doesn't just live in the past. It has its own address, its own roof, and its own place in the daily rhythm of life. Off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia, where turquoise waters lap against crumbling basalt walls, lies one of the most enigmatic burial grounds on Earth, the sunken tombs of Nan Madol. Picture a labyrinth of over 90 artificial islets, their foundations built from colossal black stones weighing up to 50 tons each, all half submerged in a tranquil lagoon. This was no ordinary cemetery. It was a necropolis for the elite, where ancient chiefs and priests were laid to rest in tombs that could only be reached by navigating narrow canals in silent canoes. The journey itself was part of the ritual, a watery passage through tangled mangroves and overgrown ruins, as if the dead demanded one final test of devotion from the living. What makes these underwater graves so extraordinary isn't just their location, but the sheer audacity of their construction. The Saudeleur dynasty, who ruled Pohnpei between the 12th and 17th centuries, built Nan Madol without pulleys, metal tools, or even wheels. Legend says the stones were levitated into place by a pair of sorcerers chanting spells, though archaeologists suspect log rollers and rafts were the real heroes. The tombs themselves, known as Nan Dawas, rise like stepped pyramids from the lagoon floor, their inner chambers sealed with precision-cut basalt plugs. Some are large enough to hold entire families, their bones mingling with heirlooms of shell jewelry and ceremonial adzes. The most sacred, the tomb of the first Sordalor king, is said to be shielded by an invisible force, a claim modern visitors might scoff at until they note how even fish avoid its shadowed entrance. Yet the true magic of Nan Madol lies in the stories that cling to its damp stones. Local fishermen whisper of spectral lights flickering above the water at night, or of disembodied voices chanting in a language no one understands. One tale tells of a curious diver who entered a tomb and surfaced hours later, babbling about corridors that stretched impossibly far underwater. His hair turned white overnight. Whether myth or memory, these accounts speak to a deeper truth, that Nan Madol was never meant to be forgotten. The Sordalor designed their graves to inspire awe, to remind the living that power didn't end with death, it merely changed form. Even the lagoon itself seems to guard its secrets. Tides swirl unpredictably around the islets, and GPS devices often malfunction near the tombs, as if the site resists modern intrusion. Researchers have mapped only a fraction of the complex. Many structures remain buried under centuries of silt or tangled in roots. What's been uncovered hints at a sophisticated understanding of hydrodynamics. Canals designed to channel rainwater into crypts, keeping bones dry even as the sea pressed in. This wasn't just burial, it was alchemy, a way to transform the corrosive power of saltwater into a preservative. Today, Nan Madol stands as both a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a cautionary tale. The Sordalor's obsession with monumentalizing death may have contributed to their downfall. Their subjects, taxed endlessly to build the complex, eventually rebelled. Yet the tombs endure, their stones slick with algae but still defiant. They challenge us to consider what legacies we build and who bears their weight. In the end, Nan Madol's greatest lesson might be this, that even the mightiest rulers are, like their island, slowly reclaimed by the sea. But oh, what a spectacle they leave behind. In the shadowy tombs of Mycenaean, where the air hums with whispers of Bronze Age kings, a glimmer of gold still clings to the faces of the long departed. These aren't mere ornaments, they're death masks, hammered so thin they seem to breathe, each one molded to the contours of a noble's face in their final moments. The most legendary, the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, was pulled from the earth in 1876 by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, who famously telegrammed a king of his own, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." The moment his fingers brushed that gold, history itself seemed to shudder. But the mask story is as tangled as the myths it inspired. Schliemann, ever the showman, insisted he'd found the legendary king of the Trojan War, but modern scholars aren't so sure. The mask's stylized beard and heavy-lidded eyes don't quite match other Mycenaean artifacts, leading some to suspect Schliemann might have enhanced his discovery. Yet even if the mask isn't Agamemnon's, its power endures. The way the gold catches the light, the delicate repoussé work that gives the illusion of closed eyelids, it's as if the Mycenaeans sought to cheat death not through mummification, but through artistry. What's most striking, though, isn't the debate over authenticity, but what these masks reveal about Mycenaean values. Unlike the Egyptians, who concealed their dead behind layers of linen and resin, the Mycenaeans wanted their elite to be seen. The masks weren't hidden in sarcophagi, they were placed directly over the faces of the deceased, their features frozen in serene dignity. This was a culture obsessed with legacy, with ensuring that even in death, a king's subjects would recognize his authority. Some masks show subtle individuality, a broader nose here, a stronger jaw there, suggesting they were true portraits, not generic templates. The process itself was a marvel of ancient metallurgy. Artisans would heat gold until it was pliable, then press it over the deceased's face like a second skin, capturing every wrinkle and contour. Once cooled, the mask was polished to a mirror finish, its surface etched with intricate patterns resembling hair or laurel wreaths. The result was neither lifelike nor abstract, but something in between, a face suspended between worlds, forever on the threshold of awakening. Yet for all their grandeur, these masks also hint at a deeper anxiety. The Mycenaeans built fortresses, not just palaces, and their graves were stocked with weapons. Their masks then might have been less about vanity and more about armor, a final, gilded shield against oblivion. In a world where power was precarious, even in death, you needed to look the part. Today, the Mask of Agamemnon gazes out from its museum case in Athens, its enigmatic smile still defying easy answers. Whether it's a Bronze Age masterpiece or a 19th century confection, it challenges us to ask, how far would we go to be remembered? The Mycenaeans answered with gold, with fire, with faces pressed so close to eternity we can almost hear them whisper. From Tibet's sky burials to the gold masks of Mycenae, these 20 practices reveal a truth as timeless as humanity itself. Death has never been just an ending. It's a canvas painted with the boldest colors of belief, necessity, and love. Each culture, from the icy peaks of the Himalayas to the sun-baked cliffs of Sardinia, crafted rituals as unique as their landscapes, turning grief into something tangible, even beautiful. The Chinchorro mummified their infants with the same care as their elders, while the Vikings sent their warriors into the afterlife aboard flaming ships. The Maori steamed their chiefs to preserve them for days of mourning, and the Four, with heartbreaking devotion, consumed their dead to keep them close. What unites these traditions isn't just their strangeness to modern eyes, but their shared purpose, to make sense of the great unknown that waits for us all. These rituals challenge us to reconsider our own relationship with mortality. In an age where death is often sterilized, hidden behind hospital curtains, or reduced to a checkbox on paperwork, they remind us that farewells can be as varied as the lives they honor. The Malagasy dance with their ancestors, the Thai build tiny palaces for spirits, the Paracas wrap their dead in textiles so vibrant they seem to pulse with life. Even in darkness there's creativity, even in loss, there's a stubborn refusal to let go entirely. So which practice resonates with you? Is it the quiet pragmatism of Zoroastrian towers of silence, or the eerie intimacy of hanging coffins suspended between earth and sky? Maybe it's the Sokushin Butsu monks, whose pursuit of eternal stillness feels both alien and awe-inspiring. Whatever your answer, one thing's certain: these traditions aren't relics of a distant past. They're invitations to question, to marvel, and perhaps to reimagine what it means to remember. As we close this journey, remember that history's most profound lessons often lie in its silences. The unspoken fears woven into bog bodies, the unanswered prayers whispered over Sati pyres, the love stitched into every Paracas bundle, they all speak a language deeper than words. So hit that like button if you've discovered something new today, subscribe for more deep dives into the past's hidden corners, and drop a comment below which burial practice left you breathless. Until next time, keep digging. The past isn't finished with us